It all started on a stormy night in Transylvania. A wild mob of angry villagers marched toward a dark castle. They carried torches and weapons, shouting as they followed the town's gravedigger to the gates. Inside the castle, Dr. Victor Frankenstein was working on something terrifying and amazing. He was building a living creature using parts from 7 different human bodies. Just as the creature opened its eyes, Frankenstein heard the mob crashing through the castle's walls. But before he could react, someone stepped out of the shadows. It was Count Dracula. He had been watching all along. He smiled and congratulated Frankenstein, but not because he was impressed. Dracula had his own plan. He wanted to use the creature for something far more dangerous, something that would affect the whole world. Frankenstein was shocked. He had only wanted to prove he could create life. He never wanted this, so he said no. But Dracula warned him there was no way out. The villagers hated him for stealing from graves, and they were ready to burn him alive. Frankenstein called for his assistant, Igor, but Igor had already switched sides. He said Dracula was paying him more. Now Frankenstein was completely alone, trapped and desperate. Frankenstein grabbed a sword and pointed it at Dracula. Dracula stepped forward and impaled himself on the blade to prove he could not be killed. It went straight through his heart, and he just stood there smiling. The weapon had no effect. As punishment, he drained every drop of blood from Frankenstein, killing him instantly. But while Dracula was busy, the creature had escaped. When Dracula searched for the monster, it threw a tank full of flammable liquid at him, causing a massive explosion. The beast then picked up Frankenstein's body and ran. Dracula was caught on fire, but as he rose from the flames, his body healed quickly. Meanwhile, the monster carried Frankenstein's body to an old windmill. It thought it was safe, but Igor had betrayed it again. He told the mob where the creature was hiding. The villagers surrounded the windmill and set it on fire. The monster climbed to the top and screamed at them in rage. Some of them started to faint when they saw him up close, but their fear turned into panic when Dracula and his vampire brides flew down from the sky. The villagers ran, but it was too late. The fire spread quickly, and the windmill collapsed in flames. Inside, the monster refused to leave Frankenstein's body, and both were lost in the fire. Dracula watched the flames burn. He had lost the creature he wanted so badly. His bride stood beside him, weeping, knowing the plan had failed. In the heart of Paris, a man named Van Helsing lived in the shadows. He was a monster hunter, hunted himself by the law. The government wanted him dead or alive. That cold night, a woman's scream echoed through the empty streets. Van Helsing rushed toward the sound, but when he got there, it was too late. The woman was already dead. Still, something didn't feel right. The killer was close. Van Helsing could sense it. He followed the trail into a dark church and stepped into a trap. Waiting inside was an old enemy, the monstrous doctor. Jackal, also known as Mr. Hyde, a beast Van Helsing had once fought in London. The creature was stronger than ever. Van Helsing fired his weapons. Nothing worked, so he pulled out a spinning handheld saw and charged. He managed to slice off one of Hyde's arms, but something strange happened. The severed limb shrank and turned back into a human arm. Before Van Helsing could figure it out, Hyde roared and slammed him into the church ceiling. Dazed and falling, Van Helsing acted fast. He shot a hook from his belt that latched onto Hyde, stopping his fall just before he hit the ground. But the fight wasn't over. Hyde tried to regain control. However, the moment he lost his balance and fell from the high ledge, his body shifted back into its human form. He crashed into the street below. The impact killed him instantly. After the fight, Van Helsing traveled to the Vatican. He reported to his superior, Cardinal Genet, but instead of praise, he got scolded. The cardinal said Van Helsing's methods were too loud, too reckless. The Holy Order, which had protected mankind for centuries, always worked in silence. Despite the warning, the cardinal handed him a new mission. He had to go to Romania, to a land haunted by Count Dracula. There, a terrible curse still waited to be broken. 450 years ago, a knight named Valerius the Elder made a vow to God. He swore that his family's souls would never rise to heaven until Dracula was destroyed. That promise remained unfulfilled. A year ago, Valerius's last living descendant, King Boris Valerius of the Gypsies, vanished without a trace. He left behind 2 children, Prince Velkin and Princess Anna. If both of them died, their bloodline would be trapped in purgatory forever. The cardinal showed Van Helsing a strange fragment of parchment. On it were the words of Valeria the Elder. The phrase matched the symbol on Van Helsing's ring. Somehow he was connected to this curse, and now he had to finish what Valeria started. With all the information in hand, Van Helsing met with Karl, the man responsible for the Holy Order's secret weapons. Karl handed him a propane-powered crossbow and a strange capsule filled with compressed lava from Mount Vesuvius, though no one knew how it worked yet. Realizing the risks ahead, Van Helsing decided Karl should join him on the journey. Deep in the forests of Transylvania, Prince Velkan was tied to a log, bait for something deadly. When a werewolf attacked, the hunters triggered a trap to cage it. The beast fought hard, and during the struggle, Velkan's gun, the only one loaded with silver, was lost. The creature broke free and charged toward Princess Anna, and just as it was about to strike, Velkan reached for his weapon and fired. The shot landed, but the blast knocked him into the river below, and he vanished into the rushing water. After surviving sea storms and frozen mountains, Van Helsing and Karl arrived in Transylvania. But instead of a welcome, they were surrounded by Anna's soldiers. Suspicious of outsiders, Anna ordered their execution when they refused to disarm. Before anything could happen, Dracula's bride swooped down from the sky, turning the village into chaos. Alara, one of the vampires, captured Anna. Van Helsing grabbed onto her, pulling her down and forcing her to release the princess. Another vampire, Mariska, attacked Van Helsing, and Anna fled, now hunted by Mariska and Verona. With Van Helsing's help, they were driven back when a brief break in the clouds let sunlight pierce through the stormy sky, burning the vampires and forcing their retreat. But the calm didn't last. As soon as the sun vanished again, Alara burst out of a nearby well and grabbed Anna. The princess fought back, wounding Alara, but it wasn't enough to escape. The other two vampires returned to finish the job. Van Helsing rushed to her rescue and struck Mariska with everything he had. She collapsed but rose unharmed. Karl tried to help, but Mariska blocked him before he could. Past the holy water. Thinking fast, Karl pointed to the church. Van Helsing sprinted toward it, soaked his arrows in holy water, and fired. The shots hit Mariska, and she burned to ash. Meanwhile, Anna tried to find cover, but Verona and Alara cornered her, ready to strike. But when they sensed Mariska dying, they panicked and fled into the shadows. The villagers, still terrified, surrounded Van Helsing and Anna once more. They warned that Dracula's brides usually killed only once a month, just enough to survive, but now they would return with vengeance. The tension finally faded when Anna revealed who Van Helsing truly was, and publicly thanked him for saving her life. Far away from the village, Count Dracula suddenly opened his eyes. He had sensed Mariska's death. His brides cried out and begged him to mourn her death, but he shut them down with the cold truth that he had no heart and no feelings. They backed away in fear, knowing even they were not safe from him. Behind them, a werewolf growled in chains while Igor whipped the beast into submission. Dracula then ordered his tiny creatures, the Dirge, to go to Frankenstein's castle. Back in the village, Van Helsing was making plans, but Anna was determined to kill Dracula herself. She didn't want anyone's help. That night, afraid she might die if she faced Dracula alone, Van Helsing made a tough decision. He knocked her unconscious to keep her safe. But when Anna woke up, Van Helsing was gone, and something else had arrived. A werewolf had broken in through the window, growling and ready to strike. She dodged the beast, and just as the moon disappeared behind the clouds, the monster's body began to shrink. It turned back into her brother, Velkan. He struggled to speak, trying to explain that Dracula had turned him into a werewolf inside his castle, and that he had discovered Dracula's secret. But before he could say more, the moonlight returned and Velkan changed again. The monster lunged, but Van Helsing had been nearby and arrived just in time, forcing Velsin to retreat into the woods. Van Helsing chased him into the village, finally getting Velkan in his sights. Just as he was about to pull the trigger, Anna suddenly appeared and pushed his arm, throwing off his aim. Velkan escaped into the night. She told Van Helsing that rumors said Dracula held an antidote that could cure werewolves. Van Helsing saw her hope and refused to leave her behind. Together, they followed Velkan's trail all the way to Frankenstein's castle, a place that should have been long abandoned. Inside the castle, they discovered Velsen, speaking to Dracula. Velsen had been ordered to spy on Van Helsing, not visit Anna. Dracula grew angry. He revealed that years ago, he had used Velken's father in a failed experiment to bring life to the dead. Now he planned to use Velken's werewolf strength to try again. While exploring, Anna warned Van Helsing about the Durgi, telling him to attack them on sight. Just then, they overheard Dracula's plan. The experiment was already happening. Velsen was being lifted by a machine, held under the storm. Lightning ready to strike. Anna wanted to stop it, but Van Helsing warned her that her brother might already be lost. They had to focus on stopping Dracula before he succeeded. As they moved deeper into the castle, they found a massive chamber filled with thousands of leathery eggs. These were Dracula's unborn children. Dracula had created life, but the babies were born dead. Now he planned to use lightning to bring them alive. Above them, the storm exploded with power. Lightning hit Velkan, traveled through his body and surged into the eggs. Slowly, the monstrous offspring began to hatch. Dracula watched with pride and told his brides to teach the newborns how to feed. Van Helsing knew he had to act. He charged into the halls, taking out every creature he could, forcing Dracula to notice him. When the Count finally arrived, something strange happened. Dracula paused, sensing that Van Helsing's heart wasn't racing. It felt strange to Dracula that he was not afraid. Van Helsing disappeared into the shadows, then struck without warning. He drove a silver dagger into Dracula's chest. For a moment it looked like it killed him, but Dracula pulled it out and stood tall, completely unharmed. The weapon had done nothing. That was when Dracula whispered something that surprised Van Helsing. He said he had known him, and his original name was Gabriel, nicknamed the Great Van Helsing, trained by monks and mullahs from Tibet to Istanbul. Dracula reminded him of their past battles together, but Van Helsing's memory had been wiped by the Holy Order, so he did not understand what Dracula was saying. As the vampire stepped closer, Van Helsing pulled out a cross and held it up. Dracula hissed and stepped back, but only for a second. The cross barely hurt him at all. While Dracula was distracted, Anna slipped away and made her way toward the giant machine that was being used for the experiment. The strange little creatures, the Durgi, quickly sensed someone sneaking around, but Anna managed to outrun them and squeeze through the narrow paths until she reached her brother, Velkan. She tried to free him, but he stopped her. He knew that if he got loose, the transformation would take over, and he would turn back into a werewolf. Far away, the vampire creatures had already reached Transylvania and were attacking the townspeople. Screams filled the night as chaos spread. In the middle of the attack, Karl risked his life to save a woman. Soon after, he noticed something strange. The vampire babies that had been born suddenly began to explode one after another. Their mothers, Dracula's brides, shrieked in pain and horror as their children vanished before their eyes. Back in the castle, Van Helsing used the chaos to escape from Dracula and quickly made his way back to Anna. The two of them ran through the forest, chased by Velken, who was in full werewolf form. He was getting closer and closer, but luck was on their side. Velsen slipped and fell into a raging river, disappearing beneath the current. For now, Van Helsing and Anna were safe. They found shelter in the ruins of an old mill and waited out the rain. As they rested, a quiet closeness began to grow between them, though it didn't last long. The floor beneath them gave way, and they tumbled into an underground cave. Meanwhile, Karl spent the night with a woman at Anna's house, and he found an ancient manuscript. It talked about a battle between a vampire and a werewolf, and how only a werewolf could defeat the most powerful vampire. Back in the underground cave, Van Helsing and Anna dug their way out of the rubble. But as they stepped forward, Van Helsing felt something strange in the air. They were not alone. Suddenly, a massive figure charged from the shadows. It was Frankenstein's creature, his face scarred and his eyes filled with pain. He growled when Anna called him a monster and shouted that he had done nothing evil to deserve that name. Van Helsing fought back, but even though he managed to wound the creature's face, he didn't finish the job. The creature, clearly exhausted and heartbroken, begged Van Helsing to end his life. He confessed that Dracula needed him to activate the machine that would bring thousands of vampire babies to life. Anna wanted to kill him right away, believing it would stop Dracula's plan, but Van Helsing stopped her. He didn't see any evil in the creature. Instead of killing him, Van Helsing used tranquilizer darts to bring him down safely. But just then, Velson appeared in the shadows. He had heard everything and vanished before they could stop him. Van Helsing realized there was no more time to lose. Dracula would come for the creature. Acting fast, Van Helsing regrouped with Karl and prepared to transport Frankenstein's creation to Rome, where they could hide him under protection. They rode day and night with Van Helsing, determined to complete the mission. But as they reached Budapest, they were ambushed. Verona, one of Dracula's brides, struck without warning, trying to take the creature for her master. Van Helsing fought her off and managed to reach the carriage. That's when he saw the bridge ahead, completely destroyed. He didn't stop. He drove the horses forward, and they made a desperate leap. The horses made it, but the carriage plunged into the canyon. Verona and her allies flew after it, knowing their target was inside. But as they ripped open the carriage, they were shocked. There was no creature inside, only a decoy. At that exact moment, a hidden bomb inside the carriage exploded, sending a cloud of silver stakes through the air. The stakes pierced Verona from every direction, and she disintegrated instantly, leaving nothing behind. As Van Helsing pushed forward, he finally spotted the real carriage carrying Frankenstein. But before he could do anything, Velkin suddenly attacked with wild force. Though he didn't kill them, his charge sent the group flying dangerously close to the edge of a cliff, and the heavy carriage was rolling straight toward them, ready to crush them at any second. With no time to waste, Karl made a bold decision. He unlocked Frankenstein's chains and let him loose, hoping that together they could stop the carriage and save their friends. For a moment, it looked like everything was going to be okay. But then Velkan returned, more furious than before. Van Helsing made a quick decision and ordered everyone to jump for their lives. In the middle of the chaos, he managed to shoot Velkan, sending the werewolf fleeing once again. The horses bolted. The carriage broke apart, and the danger passed for now. Anna rushed to find her brother and finally reached Velkan, who had returned to his human form. But it was too late. He was dying. She stayed with him through his final moments, listening as he expressed regret for everything he had done before his life slipped away. Soon after, Van Helsing returned. Anna, still overwhelmed with pain and fury, looked like she was about to take it out on him. But then Van Helsing discovered something terrifying. Velen had bitten him. That meant he was now infected, and the clock had started ticking. Before they could even think of what to do next, Ilera, one of Dracula's brides, appeared out of nowhere and kidnapped Anna. Later, she returned with an offer. She wanted to trade Anna for Frankenstein. Van Helsing agreed, but only if the exchange took place in public. Ilera accepted, and the meeting was set for the next day during the All Saints' Day celebration. Even though everyone knew Van Helsing had been bitten and could turn into a werewolf at any moment, the rescue plan continued. They put Frankenstein to sleep and hid him in the cemetery. While they worked, Karl explained what he had learned from an old scripture. Van Helsing had only 2 days before he would fully become a werewolf. On the third night, he would lose control of his mind and be gone forever. But none of them realized another vampire had overheard everything while hiding in one of the graves. When the festival finally began, they found Anna, but she wasn't herself. Dracula had used his powers to control her mind. In front of the crowd, he announced his plan. He was going to make Anna his new bride and keep her by his side for eternity. Just as he was about to inject his venom into her, Karl caused fire to rain down from above, breaking the spell and stunning everyone around. Then in a dramatic entrance, Van Helsing dropped from above like an acrobat, grabbed Anna, and pulled her away before Dracula could sink his fangs into her. But Dracula had one more surprise. He revealed that Frankenstein was already in his hands and that everyone at the celebration was secretly working for him. The place they thought was safe was actually his summer castle set up to trap them. Now surrounded by enemies, Van Helsing, Anna, and Karl had to escape fast. As they ran, Karl finally figured out how to use the special lava capsule they had been carrying. He activated it, and the device released a powerful blast of light. It lit up the whole area and instantly disintegrated all the vampires nearby, giving them a narrow path to escape. Not far from the chaos, Van Helsing watched helplessly as the creature was taken away. Locked behind thick iron bars, he tried to reach him, but couldn't break through the barrier. From the other side, He made a silent vow to find him and set him free, no matter what. Just then, Karl delivered troubling news. The Vatican had changed its orders. Now they were told not just to capture the creature, but to destroy him, calling him an unnatural being that didn't belong to the world of men. Hearing this, Van Helsing lost control for a moment. He erupted in rage, his body twitching and trembling as something deep inside began to shift. It was a clear sign. His transformation into a werewolf was getting dangerously close. They returned to Frankenstein's ruined castle only to find it abandoned. Dracula had moved everything to his main stronghold, but Karl wasn't ready to give up. He told Van Helsing that they still had one final chance. Then he revealed a shocking truth. Dracula was actually the son of Valeria the Elder. Karl explained that long ago, in 1462, Dracula died and made a dark pact with the devil. In return for a second life, he had to live by feeding only on human blood. When Valerius discovered what his son had become, he begged the Vatican to forgive his family's curse. But forgiveness came with one cruel condition. He had to kill his own son. Unable to do it, Valeria has banished Dracula to a frozen land and sealed him behind a door with no way back. However, Valeria hid clues about that secret door inside the very castle they now stood in. That's when Van Helsing remembered something Anna had told him the day they met. She mentioned how her father used to stare at a strange painting for hours. Van Helsing now believed that painting was hiding the entrance to Dracula's lost prison. But when they examined the mural, it didn't work. Something was missing. A key piece had been removed, a section with an important symbol. By chance, Van Helsing realized he had that missing piece all along. It had been given to him earlier by the cardinal, and he never knew what it was for until now. Once the mural was whole again, something amazing happened. The painting shimmered, transformed into a mirror, and opened like a portal. Without wasting a moment, they stepped through it and arrived at Dracula's hidden castle. But another obstacle blocked their path, a massive ancient door. As the beast inside Van Helsing grew stronger, he used his rising power to shove it open, dragging Karl with him. Inside, they stood in horror as they saw thousands upon thousands of eggs covering the walls, all waiting to hatch. If they came to life, the world would fall. Suddenly, Igor appeared, but Van Helsing didn't hesitate. He hurled him across the room like a rag doll. They found the creature again, trapped behind heavy bars once more. While trying to break him free, he revealed something that changed everything. Dracula had the antidote to cure the werewolf curse. That meant Van Helsing still had hope of returning to normal. Confused, Van Helsing asked why Dracula would even keep such a thing, since werewolves had always been his loyal servants. Karl, thinking back to the mural, guessed the answer. The only being powerful enough to kill Dracula was a werewolf who chose to fight him willingly. Dracula kept the antidote close in case that ever happened, so he could survive. After forcing Igor to reveal where the antidote was hidden, Van Helsing struck a desperate deal with Karl. If they failed to cure him before midnight, they would have no choice but to kill him. Far away in his towering castle, Dracula ordered the machine to be activated, raising the creature high above the ground. Sparks flew as the tower crackled with energy. At the same time, Igor led Karl and Anna to the secret room where the antidote was stored. But as soon as they turned their backs, he tricked them and locked the door behind them. Suddenly, Alera appeared, hiding in the same room, her eyes glowing with hunger. Acting fast, Anna grabbed the vial and smashed it against the wall. But instead of releasing the cure, it exploded in acid. The burning fluid sprayed across the floor, melting part of the wall and creating a way out. At the same time, Alera got injured from the splash. Karl grabbed the real antidote and sprinted away while Anna refused to run. She turned to face the vampire alone. Inside the room, Anna raised a torch to fight, but Alera used her powers to snuff out every flame, covering them in total darkness. Meanwhile, Karl was crossing a narrow bridge outside. Thunder exploded in the sky, and lightning lit up the path, making every step feel like a trap. Out of nowhere, Igor returned and attacked Karl using a cane powered by electricity. Elsewhere in the tower, Van Helsing arrived and began climbing up to reach the creature, with a werewolf strength growing inside him. He tore through the metal restraints and tried to free the creature. But just then, a massive bolt of lightning struck, slamming straight into the creature's body. Instead of dying, His body absorbed the energy, which shot out in waves, activating the eggs all around the tower. But they weren't alive yet. One more jolt would bring them to life. Knowing Van Helsing was close to stopping everything, Dracula transformed into his true form and launched a vicious attack. He tackled Van Helsing and hurled him from the top of the tower. The fall was brutal. Van Helsing smashed into the stone ground and barely moved. Above him, another blast of lightning struck. This time, it was enough. All the eggs burst open as thousands of creatures began to hatch. Since the creature's restraints hadn't fully been locked back into place, the shock blasted him into the air. He grabbed onto a swinging cable to save himself, but one end snapped loose. As he swung through the air, he collided with Igor just in time to stop him from stabbing Carl. The force knocked Igor back, but the creature was now left dangling over the edge of the cliff, barely holding on. Hanging by one hand, he looked up and asked Carl for help. Carl froze, torn between duty and mercy. Letting him fall would be easier, maybe even right. But when he heard the creature say that he wanted to live, something changed inside him. Carl reached down and pulled him to safety. Back in the dark tower, Anna struggled to see anything around her. Alara used the shadows to sneak close and suddenly attacked her from behind, landing a powerful strike that sent Anna crashing to the floor. Wounded and helpless, Anna was now completely at the mercy of the vampire, slowly leaned in, ready to feed. Just when it seemed like there was no escape, Carl used a clever trick. He aimed carefully and used momentum to launch the creature through a window. The creature flew into the room with a massive kick that slammed an arrow right in the chest, throwing her back and saving Anna just in time. Elsewhere, Van Helsing finally stood back up, bloodied but determined. Before he could catch his breath, Dracula appeared and told him proudly that all his children had been born and were starving. Van Helsing understood that he had run out of time. The only way to stop the children was to kill Dracula himself. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Van Helsing began to transform into a werewolf. It was painful and terrifying, and he fought to stay in control. Dracula watched him change and tried to offer him a deal, suggesting they work together as monsters. But Van Helsing had already made his choice. Realizing this, Dracula gave up and turned into his true demon form. The final battle began. Dracula, using his wings and his centuries of combat skill, took control early on. He slashed and struck with deadly precision. When he flew into the air to attack from above, Van Helsing reacted quickly. With a burst of werewolf strength, he leapt up, grabbed Dracula mid-flight, and slammed him down hard into the stone floor. In the other tower, the creature saw what was happening and realized he could still help. Instead of running, he chose to stay and fight, giving Anna more time to reach Van Helsing with the antidote. But getting it to him wouldn't be easy. A sudden bolt of lightning struck the bridge, leaving behind only a single narrow cable. Thinking fast, Anna told Carl to toss her the antidote while she swung across the wire. As she soared through the air, Alara reappeared and caught her mid-swing. Confident she had won, Alara paused to gloat. That hesitation cost her everything. Anna grabbed Carl's dagger and plunged it deep into Ara's chest, ending the vampire's life once and for all. Meanwhile, the battle raged on between Dracula and Van Helsing. This time, Van Helsing was faster, stronger, and filled with purpose. He broke one of Dracula's wings, causing the vampire to fall and lose his power. Dracula shifted back into his human form, weakened and desperate. Van Helsing, still a werewolf, pinned him down and began choking the life from him. But just before he could finish it, the clouds moved in and covered the full moon. The power faded from Van Helsing's body, and he shifted back into his human form, vulnerable once again. In that quiet moment, Dracula revealed something shocking. Long ago, when Dracula was still human, it was Van Helsing's ancestor who killed him and stole the very ring Van Helsing wore. Now Dracula made the same mistake again. He didn't notice that the moon had returned. As the light touched Van Helsing, the transformation surged back through him. Without waiting another second, he lunged forward and sank his fangs into Dracula's neck. The bite was fatal. Dracula died instantly. At that same moment, all of his children collapsed, lifeless, never getting the chance to leave the castle. Anna, seeing Van Helsing in full werewolf form, ran toward him with the antidote in hand. But he sensed her and turned. She knew he would kill her if she got too close. Carl, remembering his promise, stepped in to stop Van Helsing. But just as Van Helsing raised his claws to strike, he froze. Anna had already injected him with the antidote, sacrificing her life to save his. As the antidote worked and a transformation faded, Van Helsing held her in his arms, heartbroken, unable to change what had happened. Later, after everything had ended, the creature silently walked away, choosing a different path. Van Helsing and Carl stood by Anna's grave, saying goodbye. For a brief moment, Van Helsing felt her presence, her spirit rising peacefully into the sky, reuniting with her brother. She was free, and so was Van Helsing.